Hi, today I'm here with Tori Cordiano, clinical psychologist and director of research for Laurel Center for Research on Girls. So our topic for today is bullying. And I wanted to just start with, there is a definition of bullying that I think most of us don't really know.
So it's a term that gets misused quite a bit. And part of the work that I do with families is teasing apart what is social conflict, what is teasing, and what is bullying. And there's a few different definitions of bullying, but one that we go back to is a repeated pattern of targeted behavior that's aggressive. It can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be emotional, in which there is an imbalance of power, and the person who is being bullied is unable to adequately defend herself or himself.
Is that a definition in the eyes of the beholder?
Yes, to a point. So there are, if we think with people who are being bullied, and I have this conversation with kids a lot, it's important that we're using the term correctly, because oftentimes it'll get used to describe typical social conflict or people not getting along, or if there's two people who aren't getting along with somebody else and are excluding them. This happens a lot with younger adolescents, this idea that that is bullying. And certainly that can turn into bullying, but it's different than just regular social conflict or feeling left out or feeling excluded or feeling like you're a little bit ganged up on. That's different than that repeated imbalance of power in which the person feels threatened. And it could be physically threatened, it could be emotionally or psychologically threatened. The piece about the threat is what makes it different than just regular kind of social conflict that is typical for adolescents and adults to see.
If I'm the mom of a middle school kid in particular who comes home and says to me, I've been kicked out of my tribe, not in those words, but that's what we know, the lunchroom, the friendships, whatever. Do I care that that doesn't technically fall under bullying? I mean, as a parent, you right away say, my kid experienced bullying in middle school, and then they tell the story, and that's the story. It's about showing up and there's no chair for you anymore.
Yeah. So I think as parents, we have to sort of fight against that mama bear instinct to jump in and protect. And certainly that comes and that's necessary. But we first want to pause and get curious about the situation. So oftentimes middle schoolers will use the term bullying, or they'll describe behavior and our brains might quickly go to, oh, bullying, is this bullying? I need to figure it out, or I need to defend my child. But before we do that, we need to just pause and get curious and get more of the situation. Now, knowing, of course, that you're going to get one side of the situation, but at least to make sure we're really getting that one side and to try to get a little bit more information. It's good for kids to see parents taking a measured, thoughtful approach to this without immediately going on the attack. It's also good in terms of problem solving. So if your middle schooler lost her place at the lunch table and you storm into the school and start shouting bullying, it's going to be a much less collaborative, productive conversation than if you are able to get a little bit more information, see if there's any way to help problem solve, and then come in collaboratively to say, my child's struggling with her social group, she's feeling excluded, to try to be more specific about what's going on.
And when you say my child is struggling with her social group and she's feeling excluded, it sounds so tolerable. But when we hear 40-year-olds reflect on those moments, it shaped their lives. So it's hard to bullying we see as unacceptable. Is this other stuff inevitable?
Oh, that's a good distinction. And I want to make sure that when I say that it's not bullying, that doesn't mean that it's not painful, right? So it's not as if we don't meet this threshold of bullying, we don't care about it. And we say, oh, well, it's typical, work it out. Absolutely not. We need to greet our kids with empathy for what they're experiencing. And for most of us, we've experienced some piece of that. Like you said, most adults have some story of feeling excluded or a time in their life where they were really struggling socially. So it is a place where we really can tap into our own experiences and bring a lot of empathy to it. The difference is if it is bullying, it's sort of that range of when we talk with kids about problems that are in the range of what you can handle and problems where you need to get a higher level of support, right? If it's true bullying, we need the grown-ups. We need the administration at the school. We need the parents. We need the grown-ups to make it safe. If it is social conflict, exclusion, feeling left out, we still need the grown-ups, but they're in a more supportive problem solving empathy role than a let's address this and target, this specific behavior and make it stop because it's threatening and unsafe.
So one piece of the puzzle when it comes to bullying, so there's the bullier and then there's the victim, but then the idea that someone who's called an upstander can change that story for the victim and for the bully, it's a lot of burden on this group of kids who are young, and especially since most of this is happening in middle school, are they capable of being what we call an upstander?
Mm-hmm. They can. I think oftentimes as adults, we expect them to do that without doing a couple of things first. The first is that we fail to sort of put ourselves back into those 13-year-old shoes and what it feels like when you are in the lunchroom or standing outside of school or in the hallway, and how difficult it is to speak up, to confront the person who is bullying, who is often a person who's in a position of power. They have social power, or they are considered popular at times. And it's very difficult for kids to do that. It's not that we can't expect them to and hope that they will, but we need to remember what it's like to be placed in that position. The other is that we expect kids to do it without really knowing how they are supposed to do that. So to say, you need to be an upstander, you need to stand up to that bully, but stopping there doesn't give them the tools to manage it. So being an upstander can look like confronting the bully directly, which is a possibility if that feels safe. It can be like taking the side or moving like physically closer in space, or verbally sticking up for the person who is being targeted. That can be an upstander, and often that feels like a more comfortable way to be the upstander. It can also mean getting an adult or adults if that's necessary, and that needs to be the next step. And if that's the case, it might be getting the person who is targeted safely out of the situation and saying, like, come on, let's go, like, let's get to class, or let's go, let's get to lunch, or like class is about to start, let's get going. And then getting an adult to help with the situation. So an upstander is not one narrow definition. It's not, we think of it as this sort of like standing up to the bully and confronting it directly. And that's one form that it can take, but that's a hard form for a 13-year-old to do. And if that doesn't feel accessible, we want middle schoolers and high schoolers to know that there are other ways to be an upstander.
When it comes to bullying, kids don't believe that adults can change things. So then we say, okay, if you're not brave enough to go up against the bully, you can leave and go get help. But we don't really believe that help will make a difference. So what do we do there?
Yeah. So I think that is a common perception that adolescents or younger adolescents have, that you don't know what it's like, you can't do anything to change it. And in fact, for a lot of the more subtle, nuanced stuff, it may be a very fair perception, because it can go on unnoticed for a long time before the adults are really clued into what's happening, and a lot of damage can be done. So it's not they're not wrong, right? That the adults are often like slow on the pickup here, but adults can work to make things safer, particularly moving forward, if they know what's going on. So we want to equip our kids with tools to handle it in the moment, which again might be saying something directly to the bully. It might just be saying like, hey guys, cut it out, this is so dumb, like this is like 6th grade behavior, let's just stop. Or getting the person who is being targeted sort of moving closer to them physically, or moving them away, saying like, come on, let's get out of here. And that doesn't have to involve getting adults involved right away. But then the next piece of that is, if it's becoming a climate of targeted behavior or a culture of targeted behavior, that's where adults really can be helpful. And it's helpful for kids to know, here's what it can look like. Here's what adults can do to make it safer and more comfortable for everybody at school.
Are we one or the other or the other? Are there bullies and victims and upstanders, or do kids rotate through those roles?
Oh yeah, for sure they rotate. And one thing we want to make sure is that kids know that we can learn from our behavior. So if you had a situation, and as adults we all have these situations, and I think many of us over the past week have been, kind of internally confronting ourselves about situations where we maybe didn't speak up. And maybe it was a bullying situation, or maybe it was a situation in which somebody said something that really we knew was not okay, sort of set our moral red flags up, but maybe we didn't feel comfortable speaking up. we want to challenge ourselves and know that we can do better and do something different the next time. So we want our kids also to know, just because you didn't handle it this way this time, you weren't the upstander, or you did something that wasn't okay, you are not locked into that rule. There is room to learn from that and to do something differently the next time.
It's so complicated. I mean, when we really focus on bullying, like schools have this idea of zero tolerance,
Mhm.
and then does that mean there's no room for what you just said, which is reflecting and changing?
Yeah. You know, the zero tolerance policies, I think, are put into effect with a focus on protecting kids who are bullied. And we need to protect kids who are bullied. But we also are dealing with kids. When we are in school, we are dealing with kids whose prefrontal cortexes are not nearly fully developed. And so we need to have opportunities for them to reflect and change and grow. And while it's striking that balance of providing an atmosphere that is protective and safe for everybody, while also giving kids a chance to learn from their mistakes and try again and do better the next time. It's a really tough balance to strike, but it's necessary. If the approach is zero tolerance, you're out of here, there's no room for you in this community ever again, that person is still here. They're just not in this small community, right? So there needs to be opportunities for that person to learn, to grow, and maybe a time out from the community, maybe space away from the community is necessary and important, but there need to be ways for us to evolve so that we are not repeating these patterns again and again and again as kids move toward adulthood.
Okay, last question. When our oldest kid enters middle school and all of this social drama is shocking to us, there's an inclination to try to fix the problem by calling the other parent of the child where the conflict is, whether it's bullying or just social conflict. Does that ever go well?
um, Rarely, I'd say. So I would say this is where the pause, reflect, think it through comes in really handy. And it's actually really helpful to have a parent friend, and maybe it's a parent who has kids the same age, or even better, maybe it's a parent who has kids a couple years older than your kids, who lives in another town, who does not know this group of kids. Maybe she lives across the country, that you can have on speed dial and say, like, all right, here's where we are. I am seconds away from texting this other mom. Talk me in or out of it, right? Because it really does help to have somebody else who is neutral, who has maybe been there or is in that same place, that you can think this through first. It doesn't mean that you are not ever going to discuss the behavior with another parent, right? It's not that black and white. But so often, if we're talking about social conflict, we're thinking about supporting our kids, helping them problem solve, and then helping them get back in there to handle it in a healthy, manageable way. That's the work of adolescence, and it's hard work. It would be so much easier to just text the other parent and hash it out with them. But that's not helping our kids develop those problem solving skills that they need.
Okay, can I have one more last question?
Yeah.
How do we help parents like feel optimistic and hopeful about this stage if their kid is either any of those three, struggling to be an upstander, currently the victim, or your kid's the bully?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think in general, and it would be slightly different depending on where your child is and what your child is struggling with. In my years of work with adolescents, they are so good to each other. We hear about the bad stuff, but they are so good to each other as a whole. They are protective of each other. You will not meet a developmental phase that is more passionate about social justice and change and the value of people coming together. Teenagers have that in spades. We often catch the bad parts of it, but if we're able to balance that out by looking for the examples in our small community, in our kids specifically, in the school, in the wider community, for those examples of that, it really does bring a lot of hope. And then, of course, the other antidote to bullying is empathy. So if we are teaching that and modeling that and calling that out when we see it in our kids, calling it out when we see it in a TV show or a book, and then calling out the opposite of it, and using these more neutral platforms, whether it's a movie or a TV show or a book your kid is reading, using that to frame some of these conversations, it allows us to feel hopeful in a really authentic way that things can change moving forward.
Dr. Tori Cordiano, always so wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me to talk.